You here? And it's nice to see so many people wanting to come on a Saturday morning and talk about compassion. I mean, how nice is that? And it's lovely because I know so many of you as well, which is really nice. It feels like I'm chatting with friends. But I do hope that I'm not repeating myself for some people who may have heard me go on about this with enthusiasm before. So apologies if I'm repeating myself for some of you. Right, let's get cracking. Can you just give me a quick thumbs up that you can see that okay? All good? Brilliant. Get going. Okay. So this is about as much product placement as I'm going to do. This is based on a book that I wrote recently that was probably the culmination of the last 20 years of work that I've been doing. So some of you I know, or we know each other through work that I've done on positive psychology or social emotional learning or well-being. So I know that some people here and I have that connection. And this kind of was kind of me bringing it all together. It was something that came out of some of the experiences during COVID. I mean, it took me so long to write this flipping book. I did start during COVID, but by the time I finished it, I was about 50 years older than when I started it. But you know how these things are. But this is something that's really close to my heart. And we'll talk a little bit more about what I understand by it and maybe what you understand by it as well. Now, let me just open the chat and move that to that corner. Going to cover some of you up. I'm sorry about that. And then it means I can see the chat as well. That's not blocking anything you see on the screen, right? Good. Okay, then let me move on. So maybe you want to use the chat box. I know it takes a little bit of a delay, but if you wanted to use the chat box, some of the words, adjectives that come to your mind about how you feel about the world at present. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need to add any commentary, just adjectives that come to you. Any adjectives that you would use? Disheartened, oh, Frishy, nice to see you, Frishy. Worried, stressed and anxious, painful, nervous, fearful. Any others? Disturbing, disillusioned, yeah. Although I'm going to argue that this is one of the reasons why we need compassion. We need your compassion and we need more compassion. I think it is a time of change and disruption. There is quite uh, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, and the fact that all of us in this room feel the same, the fact that I was able to ask that question and be fairly sure that everybody would feel roughly the same is a sign of the times. And that rather than falling into despair about this, I actually feel quite hopeful and optimistic. And the reason I feel hopeful and optimistic is that there are 28 of you here on a Saturday morning when you could be doing something else who want to infuse your practice with compassion. Um, that gives me great hope because one of the things that we know about teachers, one of the nicknames for teachers is teachers are the architects of society. Well, if that is true, that means we have a huge potential impact. If we can change learners and we can help them reflect and become more compassionate, that will ripple out into their families, into their communities, and into the wider world. So I share all the feelings that you have, and that's one of the big motivations behind this book. I mean, I started it during COVID, so that gives you also a bit of a clue. Um, and I feel that the need for compassion is greater than ever before. And not compassion implicitly, but being very explicit that compassion is a guiding value in what that I do in our teaching practice. So, despite all of that, I'm quite optimistic. And the fact that you guys are here is one of the reasons for that. You may have heard this expression that teachers are change makers. And this, I think, is very true. This is a lovely quote from someone who wrote this. Well, he brought together these stories. I'll let you read it. I'll shut up for a minute and let you read it. A development army. I mean, if that doesn't inspire you with a sense of hope and optimism, despite everything, I don't know what does. Teachers as change makers means that we can make a difference. We make a difference whether it's to one learner or we make it to a group of learners or we make it to society through the learners, but we actually make a difference. We can make a difference. And that's what gives me great hope is that I don't feel helpless about the world. It's why I feel quite optimistic. I work with trainee teachers and I'm hopeful when I work with them because they are basically very optimistic. They're filled with goodness and they're filled with a wish to see the world to be a better place. So I know that we have difficult times ahead of us, and I know that we are going through difficult times for various reasons. But I think that compassion can give us a guiding light in very practical terms that helps us to make things a little bit better. So, compassion-based language education, why do we need it? Well, I'll come to that later, and how do we enact it? That's the sort of practicalities, but maybe I need to explain a little bit what I mean by this first. The what? I'll let you just read this. Now, the big difference about compassion, so compassion is built on empathy. So, empathy, I think most people are familiar with. It's this idea that you can imagine how somebody feels and you can feel those emotions with them. So, you can understand why they might feel a certain way and you can understand how they might feel. But compassion is that additional step, is that you are motivated into action, that you want to do something about it and you know what you could do and you know what you could do in an appropriate way. So compassion is a little bit more complex. It is about understanding and thinking about other people's feelings. You need that as the basis. And on the basis of that, you are motivated to take some action. Now, that can be compassion within the family, that you can imagine how somebody in the family is feeling. You can see what they're doing. You think about what they might need. You think about what you could do to help them, and you take action. That's compassion. So it doesn't always have to be changing the world, but it can be. So I think it's, oh, it's too small for you to read. I'm sorry, Erica. Yes, I never thought you might be on your phone. I'll read it if you want. It's my best teacher voice now. Compassion is about being emotionally moved by the plight of others and energized into action with the desire to alleviate suffering. So not only does a compassionate person feel empathetic towards the others, but they also feel empowered and able to take actions, no matter how small, to help others and to contribute to positive change. So it's about this idea that you want to do something, you understand the problems that other people feel that they're facing, and you want to be able to take action to change that. And it doesn't matter how big, it's not about having to change the world, it's not about having to be doing big things to make a difference. It's little things that you can do to alleviate somebody, taking somebody's strain off them, helping them in some way. So there are these three components to compassion: the cognitive, being able to imagine how somebody else feels, thinking about their thoughts, their emotions, understanding why. Understanding doesn't mean agreeing. So even though you may understand how somebody else feels, it doesn't mean you agree with that. It means that you are developing the ability to put yourself in their shoes, quite literally. Effective is that you are emotionally energized by this, but you also can understand the emotions that they're going through. And the agentic is this action component, this idea that you want to take action, but you know what you could do in an appropriate way. And that appropriate way is also something that I'll come back to. Now, one of the things I need to sort of draw attention to, and we'll use chat for this in a second, is compassion means different things across different languages. And so I'm using it in English where it is distinct to empathy. But I know that in some other languages, there is no different term for empathy and compassion. And some languages have different understandings of compassion. I don't know if anybody wants to comment in the chat box if a language that they know, if compassion doesn't exist as a term, or if it is used differently. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, because I know that this can lead to a little bit of confusion about how the terms are used. I'm not sure how compassion works across different languages. I know that there are issues. I'll see if anybody comments. Yeah, Kirsty, this is so Mitempfinden. We can't find it in German either, Kirsty. Compassion doesn't exist. So Mitempfinden or Mitleid. Mitleid is more the sympathy side of thing. So Mitempfinden is what you would have in German, but it also doesn't convey the difference between Mitempfinden, empathy, and compassion. They don't exist. Empathy, yes, Jana, this in Slovak, this might be the case. So it is an issue that the term compassion doesn't always work easily or is not easily understood across languages. Ah, that's interesting. So it can mean both compassion and empathy. Compassion and empathy as the same. Yeah, this is an issue in quite a lot of languages. It's interesting um to feel together with somebody. Okay, so you see that it's really interesting that linguistically there is a notion about that empathy plus action, right, Sanya? So in Serbian there is that notion that you can take action as well. So that's something just to be aware about if you're talking about it, if you're looking at the literature. Certainly in different languages, there is an issue about whether we're talking about um, compassion or empathy or sympathy and pity. And I've put them here on a sort of scale. Sympathy is where you feel for somebody else. So you say, oh, I feel so sorry for them. I feel sorry that they are going through this. Empathy is you can imagine and feel with them. That's much more that you have taken more of a step to be more close to that feeling. So it's not such of an outside perspective, you're putting yourself in their perspective. And then when you move to compassion, you're moving much more along toward action. You're taking some kind of action based on your empathy. So this kind of scale that I've put here is to show these different levels of active engagement, that empathy is a step up from sympathy and compassion is a step along there from empathy. And that maybe helps a little bit to keep these terms untangled. So I put here essentially that compassion is an antidote to indifference and is centrally connected to a sense of agency. And this is, I think, what gives me hope is that if people are interested in being compassionate, they're interested in change, they're interested in action, they want to do something. They don't just want to feel sorry for somebody, they don't want just to understand how somebody else feels, they want to do something to make things better. And that's what gives me great hope. That's what gives me such optimism. There's also perhaps one of the misunderstandings that I've been battling a little bit in working on compassion and talking about compassion. And this is something that I've engaged with, and this is some of the battles that I've had. I had it with positive psychology when we started that kind of work. I had it with the work when we started well-being work. And eventually you overcome these kind of myths and these stereotypical notions of it, but it takes time. And I think there was this idea that compassion is just nice and fluffy and, oh, it's all very nice and we're all very compassionate, we're all very kind, but it doesn't actually make a big difference and everyone's soft and gentle and anything goes. Well, that isn't my understanding of compassion. Compassion is a much stronger, much more demanding notion than that. Sabrina Neff, who many of you will know, I suspect, is somebody who has done a lot of work about self-compassion and compassion generally. And she's done some brilliant work recently on what she calls fierce compassion. And fierce compassion, she says, sometimes compassion is gentle and it's soft, and it is meant to be about taking gentle, careful, soft actions where you make small changes and small actions of change. Fierce compassion is that sometimes you may find yourself confronted with an injustice or something that feels unkind, something that feels somebody is suffering in some way, and gentle compassion is not enough. You need fierce compassion. Fierce is not angry or aggressive, it's assertive, which is quite a different way of approaching this. It means that you have the right to express yourself about this and that you do that with assertiveness. It may be interesting for some of you to know that this notion of fierce compassion came about in terms of self-compassion for women. So one of the arguments that she was having is that sometimes women find it easier when advocating for themselves to take a form of gentle compassion when sometimes maybe they would need fierce compassion. So she talks about compassion having this yin and yang, that sometimes it's a gentle approach that is needed and sometimes it's a fiercer approach, which requires a little bit more in terms of assertiveness. I added two things to make this clear. Courage is needed, that you don't shy away from uncomfortable conversations. If I think about the classroom, you can't always be having comfortable conversations. Sometimes there's a need for uncomfortable conversations, but that is a way to care because you're not shying away from reality, you're not shying away from the truth, but you do it with caring and love and respect. So it's having that courage to confront reality, to have those uncomfortable conversations. And it also being able to be courageous, you need some confidence, you need assertiveness, and you need your sense of moral compass about when it is appropriate to assert. It is not aggression. So, and then I think we need criticality. And this is something that I think there's more and more conversations about this now, particularly with things that are happening in the world politically and also in terms of technology. Criticality means that you have to honestly reflect, and this is also part of Buddhism and mindfulness, is that you have to have honest reflections and conversations with yourself and about others. And it's that looking at the truth, not shying away from it, but thinking also critically about it, not going on easy interpretations and assumptions, but looking at media, social systems, power dynamics, voice, positionality, and so on, and having those difficult conversations with yourself and difficult reflections about positionality. So it's not that you look at everything with these rose-colored spectacles. It's not that you say, everything is beautiful, we are all friends, everything is great. It's the fact that you say, I want to care for others. I need to understand what they're experiencing and why they're experiencing it, and therefore what I can do to be useful in a way that is appropriate, in a way that they would wish, and in a way that is useful for them. So it means that the model of compassion-based education that I have come to has got these three C's. So there needs to be, compassion is the driving wheel. That's the value that underpins all of this. But for this to be effective, it needs to have courage and it needs to have criticality. The courage comes from empowering ourselves and our learners with a sense of agency. And this criticality is something that, to be honest, I think all language teachers do nowadays anyway. It is rare that there is any curriculum that you would come across that doesn't include critical thinking as part of their curriculum. So I think that the criticality component is already there. But this means that the whole notion is driven by a core value, a core identity of compassion, but it's also accompanied by these notions of courage and criticality. How am I doing for time? So what I did when I was putting the book together is I thought about compassion is a value that is central to me. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I do it perfectly every day. Sometimes I mess it up completely. Sometimes I show the least compassion and I'm quite appalled at myself at the end of the day and quite frustrated. But self-compassion means I accept my own flaws, my own imperfections, and I try again the next day to be a better version of myself and to do it better. So this also requires you to be honest with yourself and to have some self-compassion. But when I was thinking about what this means to me, what does this mean for my practice, it became clear to me that there needed to be a coherence, that if compassion is my guiding value in my practice, which I'm hoping that it is, it affects two things. It affects how I teach, this teaching with compassion, the way that I enact my teaching as a teacher in the classroom with my students, but also the content of what I teach. I want to teach for compassion as well. So it's the teaching with compassion in what I do in my daily interactions with my students. And then also the value of compassion as something I want to teach my students. Of course, I'm teaching them language and I'm teaching my teachers to be future teachers, but I want to teach them about compassion. I want that to be a value that they embrace too. So it's this sort of dual focused approach, teaching with compassion and teaching for compassion. You can't have the second one, I don't believe, unless you have the first one, because there's an incoherence, there's a mismatch. If you don't walk the talk, just teaching for compassion isn't going to hold water. And your students will know that there's an incoherence, they recognize. Why? Now, you guys are here on a Saturday morning to talk about compassion. So maybe it would be interesting for me to know, why are you interested in compassion? Why is compassion something that you would like to see, I'm assuming that you would like to see more of in language teaching, language education, education more generally, maybe in society more generally? Maybe if you just want to share some thoughts and comments in the chat box about why, for you, compassion is a kind of value that is of interest to you. Because students expect it. Oh, now that's interesting, Deborah. I like your haircut, by the way. That's interesting. The effective dimension of teaching. Oh, that's nice, Fuji. Yeah, right. So putting these ideas into practice, making compassion part of practice. And so Pietro says also the effective dimension. Chantel, I agree that it's a very hopeful, very optimistic view. And I also think that sometimes learners do feel helpless, and this is also important to give them that notion of agency. Yeah, Yana, I think it is a difficult world. Oh, Sanya, that's lovely. It's beautifully worded. Yes, I do like that rhythm of connection, the language of care. And no, it isn't about perfection, it's about presence. That's beautifully worded. That's very nice. Right, Jim. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that I actually think I think this is intuitive for many teachers. I think teachers are at their heart other oriented and so can care. Deborah says this is pedagogical care. becoming aware of differences. It can bring people together, help people to understand each other. Also, that they need to be this notion of the present, and it helps learners succeed. Oh, I would like to write all those. Well, to be fair, I don't think you need me to talk now because I think you've actually addressed everything. So I think I can probably go now. So, but yeah, all of those things. Um, I put down here, I brought back the definition now of what a change maker is. A change maker is someone who is taking creative action to solve a problem or transform circumstances. Well, if that isn't the dictionary definition of a teacher, I don't know what is. And so that really interests me. Also, I think it was what Jim said, is that isn't that what it means to be a teacher? That we take I love this wording, creative action to solve a social problem or transform circumstances. That's what teaching is. Teaching is transforming people, is helping people to solve their learning problems, their learning difficulties, their lives. And it's about creative action. So this is why for me, teachers are change makers. Now, in what ways are we change makers? How can we be changing? What can we be changing? If you want to use the chat box. I'm sorry, I didn't see that one. I recently. Oh, lovely. They are very much linked to that. Okay, good. So inspiring learners. So looking at change maker on the level of the learner, that we can make a difference for the learners that we work with on an individual basis. So our class as a whole, but also those individuals in the class, that we inspire those learners and that we make a difference for those as well. Anything else? Any other ways that occur to you that language teachers are change makers? Right. So exactly, Fushi, that's how I feel very strongly, is that we can change society and the system through people. They shape minds. As Sanya says, we nurture values, we spark transformation. Sinem says we can see that there is hope. So for me, I think teachers are I think we have an enormous responsibility, but an enormous privilege that we can make a difference. Now, this is the way that the book is organized around what we call the spheres of compassion, the places where we can make change on the level of our individual learners, on the level of the class that we teach in, within our institution, within our school or our university or wherever we work. Yelena says here, by being a good example of a teacher and a human, walking the talk of compassion. And that's why we need those two levels of teaching with and teaching for. We can make a difference in our local community, maybe connecting. So one of the approaches that we talk a lot about, I talk about in the book, that I haven't got time today, is about service learning. Service learning is where you take the learning and do projects and make it real and go outside of the classroom and think about how you can connect to your local community. And these can be in small activities that you link to a course book activity, or they can be big projects. They don't always have to be big things. They can be small things too. And then, of course, we're all part of the global community. I know that many schools now have global citizenship education in their curricula in different parts of the world. It's about understanding, for me, all of this is about understanding interconnectedness. Some of you may know that I have an interest in systems thinking and ecological systems thinking, that when you look at this, you understand that the changes you make on the level of the individual learner can ripple out towards the global community. And that's not being unrealistic. That's how systems work, the interconnections of us all. So one way, and I think it was Deborah who talked about this, is looking at the kind of caring and the psychological safety we build in class. So building trust and respect from teacher to learner, but also among learners. And that means that learners, when they feel safe in class, they're willing to take risks, they're willing to persevere, they're willing to take part in activity. And it's this coherence we talked about. So this making a link between walking the talk of how we model this kind of compassion in action. And then we've got all these issues that are taking place in the world currently that we might also want to be able to address in our teaching. It doesn't mean that you have to become a psychologist. It means that you want to open up conversations and create space. If you feel that you have, for example, got learners who are struggling from mental health issues, that isn't for you to solve, but it's for you to recognize, be literate about, and be able to say, I think you might need some additional help. These are some people that can help you. Shall we talk to your family? Shall we talk to your parents? Can I help in some way to connect you? So you're not expected to take on the role of a therapist, but you are expected to be literate enough to recognize conditions and symptoms and people and see people and be able to know where to send them and where to help them and where to find greater support. And I love this quote. I never tire of this quote. A teacher affects eternity and never knows where they are. Spelled there wrong. How can I spell there wrong? I'm an English language teacher. Where their influence ends. So this idea that as a teacher, when you affect your learners, you don't know where that stops. I know that some of us in this room are teacher educators. When you train teachers, you don't know what they're going to do in their classrooms with their learners and looking towards the future and how they will affect there. So the how. It starts with a very big caveat is that if a teacher wants to embrace this notion of compassion as one of their driving values in their practice, they need to first engage in self-compassion. And this isn't something that I say lightly or frivolously. There is the notion of what we call compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is when you are so busy being oriented to others that it drains you, that it takes away your energy, and that being compassionate becomes very effortful. And so the caveat is that you start with self-compassion, that you look at what do I need? We know that being compassionate is effortful. We know that we can drain ourselves out. We can risk burnout because of being compassionate to others. So self-compassion is about being kind to yourself and treating yourself with as much love and care as you would your dearest friend. So it means that you say, what do I need? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What kind of compassion do I need to show towards myself so that I have the strength to help others? And this isn't an optional extra, this is the foundation. And if you don't begin with caring in seriousness for yourself, you won't be able to enact a compassionate language-based curriculum because you won't have the strength and the energy for it. And that's quite understandable. I've given you two strategies only here because I'm not going to try and distract myself, but we've got plenty of time at the end to chat about this. My favorite portmanteau word, it's to satisfy as a teacher, to let go of perfection, to know that something like this flower is beautiful, even if it's missing a petal or two. That your class can be inspiring for learners and engaging for learners, even if everything's not perfect. That's what it means to be human. You sometimes make mistakes, but also when you're lesson planning, you don't have to do everything to 150%. Now, I'm not trying to encourage you to, not trying to encourage you to slack off here, but know when it's enough. There is the Yerkes-Dodson curve that I'm sure many of you are familiar with because it's used in all kinds of aspects of these sort of tipping points and when it's enough is in preparation. What we know from lesson planning is there's a point at which what you do in the prep makes a difference to practice, and then there's a point at which you're just faffing. So setting those kind of letting go of perfection is a big part of self-compassion to say, what are your priorities? Do you need a little bit of time for yourself? And this is related to these kind of setting boundaries. Setting boundaries in terms of time, setting boundaries in terms of digital availability. We talked a little bit about this last weekend for some of you who were with us last weekend. This idea that you can't always be available for everybody, for everything, for all of the time, that isn't realistic. And that you need to know, okay, I need time for myself now. I need time for my family. I need to go and do some sport. I need to be in nature, whatever it is that is going to re-energize you, that you set those boundaries, time boundaries, place boundaries, digital boundaries, to give yourself your protected space as well. If we want to talk a little bit about well-being at the end, save your questions for then and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm just going to give you, how am I doing for time? I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight into the two things, what they could be. Obviously, I can't go into great detail, we just don't have the time. Teaching with compassion is very much about how we build those relationships between ourselves as a teacher and our learners, how we foster the relationships among our learners, and the classroom climate and this sense of psychological safety that we spoke about. Now, one of the things that's interesting from research is that we know that when learners are anxious about speaking or using language in class, it is not usually because they're worried about what we will think of them, as humbling as that is, but usually they're more concerned about what their peers think. So it's about how their peers are going to judge them and evaluate them. So creating those relationships, that compassion among learners, is really important for this sense of psychological safety. And if we want our learners to be brave enough to use language, to try things out, to take risk in language use, to be engaged in the classroom, they need to have a safe space. They need to feel safe to do that in the classroom. And that's why investing time and energy in building up these positive group dynamics, these relationships among learners, is never wasted time, never in a language classroom, more than in any other type of classroom, because learners have to be active and use the language, which means kind of putting themselves out there a little bit. Um, this is just some examples of the literature about why it matters. It matters for engagement. It matters for WTC refers to willingness to communicate. It matters for motivation. It also matters for teacher and learner well-being. We all know that when we've got a class that goes well and when it gels well and when they work well together, we feel good as well. And when we feel good, because our emotions are very contagious in the classroom, our learners will feel good. So it starts what we call a positive upward spiral. The key notion that we've talked about earlier, and this is a key concept, is empathy. Now, I think this is particularly interesting in the language classroom in that this is kind of the core of communicative competence. So I would imagine that many of us in this room are teaching a communicative curriculum. So communicative curriculum is a sense of we were teaching learners to use language in terms of communication. Now, the notion of a target culture, target language has become very fluid and very changeable in recent years. But language is always about interpersonal communication. And if you want to be an effective communicator, it's also about having empathy. So this is for me an interesting core part of compassion is we ought to be teaching this anyway, because that's a part of communicative competence, trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes, imagining how they feel and their perspectives, and then using that understanding for appropriate action. So it doesn't mean agreement. So empathy is not about saying, I agree with this person. It's about, I can understand why they think and feel this way. I understand how they're feeling. I can feel how they must be feeling. I can understand why they're feeling that way. And I can think of ways of taking action for that. One of the great things, so Alan Alda, any of you remember the TV show MASH? Alan Alda was one of the actors in that, and he talked a lot about developing skills as an actor. And he was talking about these communication skills and so on, but also about the ability to develop empathy and that as an actor that you need to be able to imagine what other people are thinking and feeling. And imagine, he calls it imagining people's story. And he's written a beautiful book. I can't remember. I think it's the book is something like "If I've Understood You, Would I Be Looking at You Like This?" It's a book about empathy and communication that he takes from his background as an actor. And he talks about the important about reading people's and labeling people's emotions, imagining what their story is. And I've just put two pictures here that what you can do with learners is just have them imagine, who is this person? What is their relationship? What are they thinking? Where are they feeling? Where have they just been? What is their story? Get them to create stories from this. And that is an act of perspective switching. That is an act of empathy. Using and what can be better for using tenses and language to imagine people's stories. My guess is we do a lot of this already in language teaching. This is kind of what we do, but this is about doing it consciously with a view to wanting to foster their empathy. So looking at people's faces, what are their stories? Where have they been? What's their relationship? Where are they going? The other thing is an emotions journal that learners may wish to keep. You may feel you have to decide if that's appropriate. You may want to keep it for yourself. So one of the things I talked about in another workshop that I did the other week was when we do, if you go to a cafe or an airport or a bus station or you're on the train and you look at other people, you start to imagine their stories. Where are they going? What are they thinking? What emotion is that? Can I put a label on that emotion? Can I name what I think that person is feeling? And the act of doing that, the act of looking at other people, trying to name their emotions, trying to imagine their stories, develops your skills of empathy. It doesn't really matter whether you're right and wrong about what you interpret. It's the fact that you are making that cognitive and emotional effort to imagine somebody else's world and thinking and life. And you can do that through an emotions journal where you can report on your own emotions. Can you name the emotions that you feel during a day? Can you put a word to what triggered and how did you respond? So emotions journals typically have, what's the emotion that I felt? What triggered that emotion? and what did it lead me to do? And you can then have, would I do something differently in the future? Now, sometimes learners are more or less comfortable with doing that. They certainly may not want to share that. They may decide to share ideas or insights from it. Part of empathy comes from understanding yourself in order to be able to understand others. So emotions journals that are personal are a very effective way of doing that, but people feel differently comfortable with that. So the other way to do that is have an emotions journal where people look at other people. I saw this person on the train and this is what she looked like and this is what it made me think about and this is what I thought she was thinking and this is what I thought she was going to do. So it's that kind of putting your mind into and feelings into somebody else's life. You can look about literature and film, and I have a question here is, do you read literature or watch films about your student population? So young adult literature, migrant literature, international students, older learners, third age learners, and so on. So that we as teachers can develop our empathy by reading literature or watching films about the population that we work with. And I'm sure you've got other ideas we'll come to at the end. Teaching for compassion, right. So this is a massive question, but I don't think I ever want to lose my idealism in thinking about what I see the purpose of what I do. Why do I do what I do and what's the purpose? Does anybody want to use the chat box and talk about what some of the purposes of, and I've put language in brackets, you might mean education more broadly, or you might mean specifically language education. What do we do? Why do we do what we do? What's the purpose of what we do? Oh, Jim, that was a great comment. Sorry, I didn't see it before. Setting boundaries is a very good thing to model. Yeah, if they see you do it, it's easier for them to do it and know that it's okay to do it. So, purposes of language education. Deborah says bringing people closer together, communication, understanding, helping people to connect across bridges, show that the world is bigger than what they may know, to get them oriented, to give them direction in the world. I couldn't read as quick as that meant. To learn from others, to be continually learning all the time. Kirsty, I like that one. Supporting others to be themselves in the other language. So being able to enact your authentic self, even in different languages. Natalia, hugely important. Teaching people to cooperate, to work together. That's a very big part of education generally, and certainly in the language classroom where it's usually about working in pairs, working in small groups. That's a big part of that. Thanya says to empower individuals to communicate, connect, and participate meaningfully in society. To be more honest as someone who makes mistakes, to be more happy to be honest. Sorry, Jim, I didn't read that properly. To be more happy to be honest as someone who makes mistakes. Yeah, letting go of perfection. You don't have to be perfection. Everybody makes mistakes. Helping students to develop their language skills and possibly life skills as well. So one of the things that came up in a workshop I did, this was about 2 years ago. I was doing a workshop about something completely different. It wasn't about compassion at that time, it was about global skills. So something that I was doing about, oh, you just commented on 21st century skills, critical thinking, creativity. So these traditional global skills, and we were talking about well-being skills. And one of the teachers said, but I don't see the point of this. I am only responsible for teaching English. I don't teach anything other than English. And this triggered a huge debate and it completely wrecked my workshop. It was really interesting. We had a very valuable conversation about whether that is in fact our job. So do we teach English or do we teach other things? My argument is that you are never just teaching language, whether you do that implicitly or explicitly, whether you are conscious of that or not. What you talk about or don't talk about, how you respond to learner mistakes, how you interact with learners, how you deal with conflict in the classroom, you are always teaching some value. All teaching for me is value laden. It's just whether you are explicit and conscious of that or not. And I believe that doing this mindfully is more important now than it has ever been before. And that's why for me, I want to be conscious about compassion. It doesn't mean that every single thing has to be ram-packed, but it has to be a guiding value for me in my practice, that I reflect on how compassion is expressing itself about the way I teach and what I teach. Do you want to just name a value? I mean, let's assume, I'm going to try and be assuming here and assume that compassion is a value that matters. But are there other values that matter to you personally that you want to see in your teaching, that reflected in your teaching? Maybe if you want to use the chat box, respect, that would be very important. Trust. These are important things to build up from relationship building. Both of those things are the center, the foundations of that. Being equal, so having equity, consideration, responsibility, kindness, empathy. So we all have different values that matter to us. So intercultural understanding, protecting democracy. Interesting that we had the Peace Prize yesterday all about democracy. So we all have values that matter to us. And when you look at the ways that compassion can be enacted and what teaching for compassion means, not everything will be relevant to you all the time and for every person. It's really important for me to stress that compassion-based language education is not prescriptive. It's not you must teach this and you must teach that. It's we share a common passion about making compassion a value that is central in our teaching. How we enact that is unique and individual. I will give some ideas. The book is about giving people ideas so that they can start. It is not saying this is how anybody should teach. That's not for me to do. I don't know you. I don't know your classrooms. Everybody will do this differently. So this compassion-based education is about sharing a common value and identity and allowing us to find each other. So just like this wonderful project that we can find each other and say, we share a value of compassion. How are you doing it in your classroom? How am I doing it in my classroom? How are we enacting that? Have we got ideas that we can share? One of the things we know is that when teachers do teach in ways that align with the values, it has a really positive impact. If you are teaching in a way that aligns with what matters to you, it will boost your engagement, motivation, satisfaction, well-being, confidence, and also your sense of identity. So there's a lot of research that shows that it's very good for your well-being when you're teaching in ways that align. The teaching for compassion has got, I've split it into 4 kinds of key areas: compassion for self, compassion for peers, compassion for others, and compassion for the planet. And we don't have the capacity to talk about all of those, but I'll just focus on self, peers, others, and compassion for the planet as one. A wonderful quote by the wonderful Nelson Mandela: no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin or background or religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, because love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And this is why compassion can be taught. It will be harder for some learners to learn, possibly because I think there's a lovely quote that those who struggle with compassion and require compassion are those who've experienced least compassion in their lives. So sometimes those that are difficult to reach learners may be the ones who need this more than anybody. So compassion for others, and I mean others in the community, others in your class, others broader, it builds on what we do in the classroom. So when we build those relationships among our learners, and this is what I mean about this kind of coherence, when we help learners to build positive relationships in the classroom, that gives them skills that they can take beyond the classroom. So building these lessons of empathy, building these interpersonal skills within the classroom is developing skills that they will take beyond the classroom. And that's about developing these pro-social attitudes. So pro-social is the opposite of anti-social. It means pro-social, positive for the community, positive for the group, positive for the climate. And looking at random acts of kindness. Somebody commented about kindness. Kindness is a form of expressing respect for others. It's about thinking about what others might feel, might benefit, and doing something that's useful to others. Anybody think of an everyday act of kindness you witnessed recently? So kindness doesn't have to be that you, I don't know, go and mow your neighbour's lawn. It might just be that you hold the door open for somebody with a smile. Kindness doesn't have to be, kindness becomes a way of being in who you try to be every day in your everyday interactions. So it doesn't have to be big gestures, doesn't have to be donating all your life savings to a charity. It can be, that's beautifully expressed, an appreciation of small things. The fact that you do small gestures of kindness to somebody, that you acknowledge somebody else, that you see them, that you help them to feel seen and heard, that you give somebody a compliment if that's appropriate in your culture, that you support people if they need help, that you smile simply. I mean, it doesn't have to be much, does it? But that you have these ways of enacting kindness on an everyday basis. This is an activity that I've done with my students at university. This, I think, is a really interesting, the golden rule and the platinum rule. And I'll just let you have a look. Treating others as they would wish, as you would wish to be treated, or as they would wish to be treated. Now, that's quite a potentially fundamental difference. And it's really interesting to open that up to discussion with your students. And if you want to talk about empathy, and that's when we talked about appropriate action, is the action what you think is good for them, or is that what you think they really would want to have? And that's a big shift in perspective, perhaps. Finally, just some examples about eco-literacy. So eco-literacy in Austria, where I live currently, we actually have a sort of slightly different issue, different problem in that our learners are very aware of environmental issues. They get this in primary school, they get it also in kindergarten. The society here is very well developed in those terms. But there is a different problem now in that we are getting also eco fatigue and eco apathy. So that when they get to the teenage years, some of our students are just saying, yeah, yeah, I heard it all before. Yeah, yeah, recycle. Yeah, yeah. And they've heard it and they're not, and they're losing that connection to it as something real and relevant. And so eco literacy says that there are two ways to make a difference. And this also overcomes eco anxiety. First of all, learning to care. So, caring for the environment, caring for nature, caring for animals, caring for biodiversity. But this is an important part that doesn't lead to helplessness and doesn't lead to the sense of eco anxiety, is empowering them to take action. This notion, again, we're back to this idea of agency and action, that caring for the environment is the first step. If you've learned to care, you then have to know, what can I do to make a difference? What actions can I take that make a difference? Um, so maybe just the first one, and we'll talk a little bit about that, or you can talk about the second question. What images of nature do you have on your phone? If you have a quick look at your phone, have you got any images of nature on your phone? What is your image of nature that you've got on your phone? And why? Why do we have images of nature on our phone? Mushrooms. Did you? Oh, mushroom sky. Oh, lovely. Oh, water lily, beautiful, Simon. About a million of my roses. Chantal, that's lovely. Your roses must look better than mine. Yes, Deborah, because nature is very soothing, it's very calming. Snow, stream in a forest, flowers and sunset, flowers, mountains and forests, and seas, lakes, sea, lots of flowers, trees, parks, anything else? Autumn, oh, lovely, that time of year, autumn leaves, lovely, yes, very nice. Um, Dogs, yes, we have those too. Oh, yeah, Evelina, your garden, your vegetables, then they are looking much better than mine. My vegetable garden's looking a bit sorry for itself at the moment because we've already had our first frost, so that's wrecked my vegetable garden, which is looking a bit peaky. Um, Biophilia is this idea that humans are very connected to nature, and the fact that society developed so quickly, urbanization happened so quickly that in evolutionary terms, humans have not yet disconnected from the previous forms of ourselves, which were very strongly connected to nature. So nature is very natural to us in a sense that this connection we have with it is very strong still, even if we don't find ourselves in that space. It's good for us physically, it's good for us mentally, and when we learn to care about it and care for it, it makes a difference to how we connect. I had to share this with you. This was my picture from my holiday this summer, where I had a rhino decided to lie on the road and block the road, and we had to turn around, which I can't think of a nicer thing to see, and a rhino with its horn still. And if you learn to care for these animals and you see them and you care, you change the things that you do. And it can be ordinary beauty too. These are my asters. So Evelina, my vegetable garden is looking a little bit sorry for itself, but as you can see, this was taken yesterday. My asters are looking beautiful. They are blossoming and having a wonderful time. And the bees are still enjoying them. As you can see, I even caught a bee on there. So the overview effect Paquette refers to is when the astronauts first went into space, when they went to them, they looked down on Earth and the blue planet, it changed them. It was such an emotional experience that every single astronaut that came back said it changed their view of the planet, but also their view of environmental issues and how we must care for it. And this notion that this is our only home, why would we not care for it? This is our home. This is where we all live. So we need to care for it. So this notion of awe, so there's a wonderful book called Awesome Learning. and the role of awe in learning and education. So, learning to appreciate the magnificence of something and the fact that it's very humbling and the fact that it's something that we appreciate the beauty of and so on. That can be very motivating and creates that human, that connection, that emotional connection. You can create a nature scavenger hunt where they go and look for things and they can decide what they go and look for, or you can decide it and you have them look at it as a homework and bring it back and talk about this. It's about becoming aware, this mindfulness and becoming aware and noticing and then learning to care for it. And then you can have them develop bingo for action, so eco bingo, where they pick things that they want to try and do and then they decide to try and carry it out for a week. This idea that they've got something that they can do, that they can take action. So compassion-based language education, I hope I've explained briefly what it is, why we need it. I hope that you might also become a compassion-based language educator, that maybe that compassion will be an identity that you would like to hold and that you will carry it out on your terms. I can only just give ideas, but I'm extremely inspired by the number of people I've spoken to and that this resonates with, and people are doing it in really brilliant, innovative, exciting ways, much better than I can do. So I'm hoping that maybe compassion might be a value that you embrace, an identity that you take on board, and that next time there's a webinar on this, you'll be running it and telling us what you did and how you're working as this. And I'm just going to leave you with this final quote. Be the change you wish to see in the world. The world's not perfect, but there's a lot of great people with great motivations and a lot of people wanting to make it a better place. And I think that we're in a good position to lead that change and take some action, even if it's on a person by person basis. Thank you so much for taking the time to come this morning and chat with me about compassion. And I've just left time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for this wonderful, insightful session. And we have a couple of minutes for the questions, I guess. Let's open the floor to questions from our participants. If you have any questions to Sarah, please submit your questions in the chat box, and hopefully we'll go through them shortly.
And Jim, I love your comment, and the fact that there's this project here is really inspiring for me. And maybe we will see conferences and things with the theme of compassion and love and wisdom and how we can share more of that. Thank you. Peter, the platinum rule. So the golden rule is do unto others. You may have heard this before. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. So it means you do to others as you would want people to treat you. But the platinum rule is do unto others as they would want. So really, it means not assuming that people want things from your perspective, but what would they really want if you really understood their perspective? So it's a shift of perspective. It's not saying do unto others as you would want to have done. It's do unto others as they would want to have done to them. And it's not uncontroversial. I don't say that one is better than the other, but they are. They bring out different perspectives in terms of what might be appropriate behavior and appropriate action in terms of helping others. I've put my email address here, Sanya. If you want to get in touch, I love to be in touch. I think this inspires me, and it's one of my favorite topics, and it's important and it matters to me. But this project is the perfect place for people to come together and connect. And if people do start to say, this is a value that I embrace, this is an identity that I embrace, this is the perfect place for that exchange. And like Jim said, maybe there'll be a conference on this that we can come together and we can talk about how are we doing it, how do you experience it, what are the challenges you face. I just would love to see more of this. And I think the fact that there's 30 of us here on a Saturday morning is inspiring. Oh, thank you, Evelina. That's lovely. That's brilliant. Thank you. You've made my day. That's lovely. And I think we've got, I think it's a good time for us to be able to make a positive difference. And if we're not the ones with compassion, if we're not the ones leading with compassion and trying to do it better, and like I say, don't be hard on yourself if you muck it up sometimes. I'm the shining example of I muck things up on a regular basis, but you go with a positive intent and you try to do it better again the next day. And sometimes it's about also, so sometimes for me it's recognizing what I've done wrong, what I could do better, but also what went well. It's so typical for us as teachers to focus on every time we get it wrong and every time we make mistakes. And self-compassion does focus a little bit on sort of problem oriented sometimes, and it focuses on when we need to be kinder to ourselves because we recognize our failures as humanity. But I think we can also sometimes focus on our strengths, that we are trying, that we've got this intent, that things went well. When was it a success? Why was it a success? How can I do more of that? So sometimes being kind to ourselves means also this focusing on our strengths, focusing on the positivity, focusing on how we can do it, how we did something well, why was it brilliant, and how can we do more of that? Let me see. Fuji says, do you sometimes encounter difficult students when you teach with them? What do you do with students who are not who look down on issues like this? Do you know, this has actually been kind of interesting. It's funny that you should ask that. So, with my students here, I actually haven't encountered any problems yet. And I don't, that sounds a bit weird. I don't really know why. I don't know. I expected to experience some resistance. And I think one of the things has been that I don't try to say, because we talk about that compassion is something very practical. It's very grounded. It's not about telling you who you have to love and what you have to like and what you have to and so on. It's about thinking about the world around you, choosing the things that matter to you because maybe you don't feel you can affect everything, and wanting to make a positive difference and allowing them to decide how they enact that compassion. So telling them that I feel this is a value that they should embrace and that this is a value I would like to embrace and this is why I would like to embrace it, but not telling them what they have to embrace it in respect to, but letting them tell me what matters to them. Maybe that makes a difference. Maybe that autonomy of voice and choice in terms of the object of their compassion, certainly at the early stages, maybe that helps as well. I'm not sure. Thank you, Peter. I'm not sure you want to read it cover to cover. Let me have a look down here.
Okay. Yeah, lots of lovely comments in the chat box. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today with us, for your attention and engagement during the webinar. I think we have no more questions if I haven't missed any of them. Before closing, I just want to share a feedback form with you to collect your ideas about this webinar and your suggestions for the upcoming webinars. And I also would like to remind you to check our website, project website, for the upcoming events. I just shared the document in the chat box. On this document, you can see the relevant links for our website, a YouTube channel, and also Facebook page. So you can follow the website and our social media accounts for the upcoming events. And on our YouTube channel, you can watch all the previous webinars as well. So thank you one more time, Sarah and dear participants, for being with us today. Wishing you a mindful and restful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you,
Thank,
Sonia. Thank you,
thanks,
Chantal.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you,
Thanks so much,
everyone.
Sarah.
Bye.
Thanks a million. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice Saturday.